Hello, friend, and welcome to the sixth installment of Overheard Orlando. Before we begin, I did want to give myself a little proverbial pat on the back here. Upon release of this episode, I have officially beaten pod fade, which is a concept that speaks to the fact that I think it's 76% of all podcasts never make it past episode 6. Technically, there are 8 installments of Overheard Orlando so far, but this is the 6th official episode. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you and share that I'm kind of proud of myself. So, anywho, today's episode we'll be talking to Danielle Budd, who I consider to be an aesthetics guru. She is something of a design expert, and she'll be talking about design and love. So, in the first of what I'm sure will be many episodes on this topic, let's talk about love. All right, Danielle, so welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing just great. Thanks for asking. I understand that you specialize in interior design, and I really feel like in a lot of ways that can kind of relate to the topic of love, particularly the relationship that someone has to their own space and taking that personal space. What similarities could you draw from the psychology involving having your own personal space versus the psychology that kind of comes about when someone newly out of a relationship is now kind of in their own head and kind of within themselves?
So I feel like when it comes to design, whether that's interiors, whether that's fashion, in this case specifically, it would be interiors. A lot of it really comes down to self-expression. So really the person that you want to be, which kind of can be parlayed into, when you're coming out of a breakup, who do you want to be? So redesigning your space about how you want to be represented, but also understanding the psychology of how do I want to feel. So I think that there's a lot of psychology when it comes to interiors as far as, the colors that you choose and the pieces and the styles that you choose to represent the space is also a representation of you and how it makes you feel. And I think that whenever you come out of a breakup, it's always kind of nice to do a little freshen up with your interiors. You can change the paint, you can change the throw pillows, you can get fresh flowers. And I think that kind of in a way, signifies the start of a new chapter. And I feel like psychologically having a new space is a new chapter, emotionally and in the physical space as well. So I think that your interiors definitely dictate a lot of the way you feel and the way that you perceive your world around you. So if you're going through, experience like that, sometimes it's nice to change up the environment and start something new.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I kind of really enjoyed that comparison just because with redesigning a space versus life after, a long-term relationship, you kind of take a personal inventory of things that, whether it be items in your room or some other area of your house, or if it's certain attitudes and beliefs that you are now adjusting or changing or completely replacing that you've held within yourself during the duration of that relationship.
I actually love that whole idea that you just mentioned of, redesigning your space and essentially redesigning your life. It's such a beautiful thing because essentially we all have control over both of those things.
I feel like a lot of times when people enter a relationship with someone, they kind of lose their identity and they kind of adjust themselves to cater to the other person. And I think that when two people live together, kind of from a design aspect, people can do that as well, whether it be one partner taking the reins on the design and the other one kind of giving their power away in terms of not really making any decisions design-wise. That can kind of also be the case in a relationship where you kind of have a passive party sometimes where the person's just kind of going through the motions of it and the other person is kind of in control the entire time. So what tips would you have on either front as far as how to mitigate two different design ideas or two different ideas of how a relationship should be?
I think it kind of comes down to compromise. I think a lot of those things are very much compromise, whether it's meeting in the middle and how you and your partner are going to design your space, or even meeting in the middle of how you're going to construct your relationship with each other. A lot of it is compromise, a lot of it is communication and kind of meeting in the middle. Not to say that, I haven't taken control in the past when it comes to designing the space, because, I always thought that I had a better say and perspective on that. But, really, when it comes to, getting into a relationship with somebody and sharing a space, it's really about meeting in the middle. And because, you are sharing your lives at that point, and it's, making space for them and then making space for you, and meeting in the middle, and just, having that appreciation for each other, and, hearing each other in both of those ways.
Yeah, I mean, sharing a life and sharing a space are actually two pretty similar concepts. You kind of spent the most intimate moments of your life in your own personal space, I would say. So, you kind of want to be surrounded by both people you love and, things that make you comfortable, or things that you love, and things that kind of make you happy and make it feel like a home, as should the people who live in your space make you feel like home.
Absolutely. 100%.
So, to kind of play off what you had mentioned about compromise being both so paramount in a relationship or in designing a space, what do you think some of the consequences of not compromising would be? I feel like most people would say that compromise is very important in a relationship, and yet very often it doesn't come into practice, and many people find themselves kind of bending to their partner's will, whether that be in an attempt to make them stay, or in an attempt to not create problems, or, with the best of intentions, people often just kind of go with the flow and don't try to have their own input. So I'm just curious what you think some of the consequences of that would be.
So I feel like whenever you're in a situation that there is no compromise being done on either part, and, there's one person getting their way and there's another person that's just kind of along for the ride, as you mentioned, I think one of the biggest consequences of not compromising and not meeting in the middle is that, are you really truly showing up? Are you really truly seeing that person that you're with? And I think that whenever you start to create that environment, it easily becomes very toxic. And I think that people start to lose themselves, and they start to lose their identity, because if you're not going to show up for that person to be seen, to compromise for them because they are sharing a life with you, then it's almost as if they're going to question everything else. So I do think that compromise is very important. When you start to not compromise, it starts to lead more towards toxic habits and tendencies, and the intentions aren't as pure as if you're meeting in the middle. Because, like I said, whenever you truly care, when you truly love for somebody, you compromise and you meet in the middle because you still value them as an independent person and as an individual outside of you. So it's very important to recognize that they still very much have an identity, and they're still very much an individual person outside of your relationship. And you have to still respect that. And they carry that identity, not only in your relationship and your partnership together, but also in the other aspects of their life.
I think compromise really is the key to so many things between interpersonal relationships, not just romantic relationships and not just design, but work relationships and friendships and, mentorships, just literally anything. There's just very rarely a situation where one person is 100% going to get their way without stepping on any toes. So I think it's really, really important to recognize that. And I think that takes a lot of trying to understand the other person's needs and desires, and trying to incorporate those in your own in such a way that both parties involved can kind of feel heard and feel like both parties are feeling like they got to win, essentially, in the situation.
But, of course, in order to compromise, really, you're kind of having to forfeit the ego in order to show up for somebody like that, and recognize that it's really not all about us. It very much is still our lives, and there are still, things that are very, very much important that we should uphold for ourselves. But the moment that you decide to share your life with somebody is really important to, again, compromise and make space for them as well. And I feel like in order to do that, you also have to kind of surrender the ego and kind of unite and understand that they're also another person. They also have feelings, and, you're not just thinking about you anymore. You're also thinking about them and keeping them in consideration as well.
One of the kind of greatest movements or greatest attitudes that have been coming about in recent years has been the movement of self-love and kind of treating yourself, a little bit better than maybe people have been doing in the past, and kind of loving yourself and being okay with yourself. So when you kind of have that self-love and you introduce a new person into that, and now you have another person to love, and sometimes you do have to compromise down some of your needs or wants to kind of cater to another person. What's the best way to love yourself while still reasonably loving someone else and making certain concessions about what you want just out of life in general?
I actually really love that you brought up the whole self-love movement. It's one of my favorite things that we've started to normalize. I think it's really important that we kind of bring it to light and really try to make it a point to implement that in our daily lives and in our relationships with ourselves. So, as far as self-love, it's very important, because whenever you decide to love yourself, you're essentially setting the bar of what you'll accept from anybody else. So by loving yourself, you have to decide at that point, what am I going to put up with, and what are my values, and what is my worth? And to be able to recognize other people who see the same in you that you saw in yourself. So I think when it comes to continuing to practice that self-love in a relationship is understanding the habits that you created before the relationship. And it could be something as small as, you bought flowers for yourself every weekend, or you'd go on evening walks, or you'd go to the gym, or you would take yourself out on a date, or you would do this. Those little things where you would allow yourself to have time for that hobby every week. Those are all acts of self-love that you did for yourself. And I think what happens is when a lot of people get into a partnership, they end up kind of forgetting those things. And eventually, they aren't doing those little things for themselves that they did, just to validate on a daily basis that they do love themselves and they are taking time for themselves in those manners. And I think it's incredibly important, even though you are in a relationship, to continue to do those things for yourselves, and you can also do them for each other. And that kind of goes right back to what we were saying about, identity in a relationship. If I continue to do these things that I did for myself before I met my partner, there's really not a huge loss of identity. But if I get into a relationship and all of a sudden I stop doing all those things I did for myself, I almost essentially start to lose myself. So it's really important that you still practice those acts of self-love, and for everybody that's going to look a lot different.
I really, really, really love that answer. I am quite a huge fan of the solo date personally, taking yourself out and kind of just being alone with your thoughts, and maybe you'll do a little writing or read a book or whatever the case may be, whatever it is that you need at that time. It is important to make sure that the other person is showing up to the relationship, and it's important to have expectations of that person. That being said, you can't expect anybody, not even your lover, to kind of do it all. You do have to do a lot for yourself and kind of remember to continue to do things for yourself and kind of take care of yourself and check in on yourself even. So really, really, really happy that you mentioned that.
Of course. And I'm a huge fan of buying myself flowers. It sounds so small, but ladies, it makes a huge difference.
So kind of like a fixture in your home that has long outlived its lifespan or its usefulness, or maybe you've just completely changed your mind on it. At what point would you say that decision could be made about a relationship? Like I mentioned, we do compromise, and we kind of sometimes we give a little bit, and we kind of are willing to quell our own wants and needs to cater to someone else. But at what point is it too much? At what point are we giving too much?
Well, it's always interesting because, there's always that one piece that, someone doesn't want to get rid of because they don't necessarily love it anymore. And it doesn't necessarily bring them happiness, but it makes them comfortable because there's some type of emotional attachment and a good memory associated with it. So when it comes to having a piece in your home that has long outlived its life, similarly to how relationships can often be as well, I think you have to take a step back and say, yes, I do have an emotional attachment to this. And yes, I do have very great memories. But is this bringing me happiness right now? The same way that it did whenever it started or when I had the piece or whenever I met this person, how do I feel about it now? Am I reminiscing in old feelings and I'm allowing that to, basically overstay its welcome? So it's almost like, what's the lady from Netflix? The Mary Kondo. Is that her name?
Oh man, it's Marie Kondo.
Yeah. So in certain points of your life, when it comes to interiors, relationships, you have to Mary Kondo that shit. So basically, does it bring you joy? Yes, then you should keep it. If it doesn't bring you joy, bye.
Excellent. I actually do kind of a similar process when I'm looking to get rid of something. I kind of harken back to when was the last time I used this, or when was the last time I actually did anything with this. And the same could be said about a relationship that's kind of lost its spark. Is when is the last time this person made me feel this way? And of course, no one's expecting or shouldn't be expecting the honeymoon phase to go on forever and ever and ever. But I mean, if you're just essentially coming to a point where you're roommates who, occasionally engage in sex or something, or you're just like friends who, don't really do anything intimate at all, I think that might be time to take that little inventory and ask yourself essentially what you just said.
This might sound emotionally detached, but do a spring cleaning. Every now and then, basically going through your space, and that could be your space as in literally the space that you're living in, or literally the space that people are occupying with you, and just going through those and evaluating those things. And like you said, is this still bringing me joy? Am I still keeping it around just because it's comfortable? And you'd be surprised that whenever you decide to throw away things that no longer bring you joy, or you decide to not allow people to take up space in your life anymore. Initially, the decision process can be a little uncomfortable and it is a little sad. But I think that there's a lot of power and strength and growth that kind of follows that we don't talk enough about.
So, what do you say to the woman who is listening right now and who is 100% that bitch, and she kind of has someone in her life who kind of makes her doubt that, or makes her see herself as less than what she is, or not even a woman? What do you say to somebody who is in a relationship that is just toxic on their health, but just doesn't have it in them to do that spring cleaning and kind of toss it out?
I would say that I think deep down we all know the answers, even though we don't want to recognize them or to accept them. But when we're in these situations, I think we know the answer. We know that that's not the relationship we need to be in. And we know that we don't deserve that. But then we get comfortable and we stay. And it's a lot easier to stay than it is to leave. And I think, have that intuition to be in touch with yourself and listen to your inner voice that says you need to get out of this situation. You deserve better. There is more on the other side than what you're allowing yourself right now. And you just need to allow yourself to have that courage to move on and essentially take that leap of faith into essentially the unknown. Because whenever you leave your comfort zone, you don't know what's on the other side and you're not promised anything at all. So I think it's just really important to be in touch with yourself and to be honest with yourself. Is this what I want for the rest of my life? Is this what I want to deal with? Is this how I want to be treated for the rest of my life? And then most of the time, the answers are going to be no. And most of the time, you don't deserve that. I think that there is someone out there for everyone. And even if it means you being by yourself for a little bit, it's a little scary. Being lonely is scary. But you're going to learn so much about yourself, and that is such a beautiful thing. And you're going to learn to self-love yourself, and you're going to learn your self-worth. And you're going to attract people who essentially end up doing the same exact thing. And it might take a while for you to get the answers, but eventually you're going to understand why all that happened and everything's going to make sense. But it just really came down to that moment that you needed the courage to decide that you deserve better and walk away.
I quite like that. quite like that. I think it's really hard sometimes to really know when it's time to call it quits. It can be really challenging. I think that kind of like we kind of talked about before, it was like there are certain memories you can kind of look back on, and even if the last good memories are, you know, years and years in the past, you kind of cling to those even if you're both different people in the current time. So
Well, I think that we always want to see the best in people. And I think that that's also what leaves us in relationships a lot longer than what we should be in them for. Because when we care and we love about people, we want to see the best in them. But then the moment that we start making excuses and, you have to step back and be honest with yourself. And yes, those are great memories. And yes, those are valid. But is that the reality that you're still experiencing with them? And if it's not, then you have to walk away. You can't stay around because it's comfortable. I mean, at what sacrifice? Your mental and physical health and well-being?
and trust me, those things do take an absolute toll on both mental and physical health in ways that I think a lot of people do not realize whatsoever. With that being said, the first love that most of us experience, barring some kind of really unfortunate childhood events, the first love most people experience would be the love from their parent. And I am a firm believer that any and all parents will screw you up. And no matter how good you do or how much you try, something's going to go wrong. You're going to get frustrated and yell at your kid one day, and they're going to carry it around in ways that you never think they would. And it's just a fact of life. Nobody's perfect, and nobody's upbringing will be perfect either. We know that parents can teach people a lot of toxic behaviors, but I really want to talk about how can people unlearn the teachings of their parents regarding accepting certain toxic behaviors and kind of, certain outdated concepts or things like that that we have been kind of taught are okay and we kind of deal with because we were raised to believe that it is the norm. How do we unlearn those things?
I mean, I definitely think our parents set the stage when it comes to what we assume to be as normal when we go into, the partners that we decide in our future. And the thing is just because I think where we all go wrong is we assume that because they are our parent that they're right. But the reality is yes, they are our parent, but they are humans just like us, and they've made mistakes just like us. And more often than not, no one is a perfect parent. And the reality is what they were going through in their trauma basically altered the way that they reacted and the way they treated us. And then we, in a sense, carried on the trauma that they showed to us. Now, the thing is, it's very important for us to break that chain because we then can carry that into our intimate relationships and pass that on to our children. And you see it time and time again. So in order for us to essentially break that chain, we have to become aware. We have to become aware that exists. And we have to become aware of what the traumas are. And you've probably heard the term shadow work. I'm an adult and, I feel this way and I react this way about this, but I don't understand why. Why do I react this way? Why did that trigger me? Oh, well, I feel like, I felt triggered that person didn't give me attention because now I don't feel validated and my parents never validated me. And now I'm on this continuous, run to be validated by people. And I think that getting to the bottom of things and understanding the inner workings of yourself and your mind and your emotions and why you feel a certain way and why you react a certain way and what triggers you. And at that moment that you become aware that that's the issue is the moment that you can decide that you're going to break the chain and you can change it. And it's not an easy process because, let's say that you're aware that that's the problem. And you're like, okay, well, I want to change it. And then the next moment you're triggered by something, the same thing. And you're like, okay, then at that moment, whenever you're triggered, you can decide, do I want to react the way that I have been conditioned to react? Or am I going to take a step back and say, hold on a second, I'm not going to react the way I normally do because I understand that this is the problem and I don't want to react this way anymore because I want to grow from it and be a better person. And then you change the way that you react. And through psychological conditioning, you're essentially rewiring your mind in the way that you react and essentially breaking the chain of traumas that your parents handed down to you.
You hear a lot about people who are like, oh yeah, they have mommy issues, they have daddy issues. And I think that the real fact of the matter is we all have one or the other or both on some level because, like I said, there is just no right way to raise a kid. And that's just something that in adulthood you have to kind of go on a kind of interpersonal journey of sorts and kind of deal through that and work through that through those issues.
Well, I actually told myself that, you know, if I have children, I want to wait to have children until I feel that I'm at a point where I fully understand myself. Because I understand right now I'm not a perfect person. I'm never going to be a perfect person. But I also understand that there's a lot of things that I have to work through emotionally that I carry as baggage, as most of us do. But I want to make sure I work through those things and understand them and grow into a better person before I bring another person into this world, because I'm going to be their coach. I'm going to be their mentor, their teacher, the person that loves them first. And I want to make sure I'm the best me and the best version of myself so I can truly put my work into it, and they deserve the best. So I'm essentially breaking the chain because I want them to have the best, and I'm going to wait until that is possible.
So, kind of in the realm of those behaviors or acceptance of behaviors that we kind of pick up from our parents or those who cared for us as children, one word that you see or hear rather a lot of is gaslighting. And that kind of comes into play both in the romantic space, it comes into play on Facebook arguments, in politics, and in several different realms of interpersonal communications. What do you think is the best way to combat this kind of I won't call it a new trend because I feel like it's something that's been done for quite some time, but it's something that we've kind of caught on to and are realizing is a thing. What's the best way to combat gaslighting?
I mean, essentially, when it comes to gaslighting, I mean, the first thing is being aware that someone is gaslighting you and that that's their intentions. But sometimes it's not always so obvious. But when it starts to become obvious is whenever you truly believe in the statement that you're saying, and someone now is making you question, even though you know what you're saying is true, or that what you saw is true, or what you experienced is true, and that what you felt was true. And the moment someone starts questioning you as if that was never an experience that you had, and then the moment that you start to believe them and then you start questioning your reality is the moment that you start questioning the way you perceive yourself and the world around you. And in a sense, kind of creates these trust issues. And then you start to not trust your natural intuition that you were given. So I feel like, trusting your judgment, trusting your intuition, and trusting the way that you see the world around you. I think that there is a difference between someone, teaching you something and then someone misleading you in terms of, in hopes to control you and the way that you think to benefit them. But I'll think a lot of times when we see this gaslighting behavior, don't you agree that there are certain personalities that come with it? I typically find it's usually more of narcissistic behavior.
Yeah, gaslighting is definitely it's pretty toxic, and there's definitely are certain personality traits that come to mind when I think about it. I think that some people do employ it knowingly, and some people don't even realize that they're doing it because it's just something that has been so normalized to them, either through the fact that they've been doing it for their entire life, or something that maybe they have learned from their parents or their peers, or wherever the case may be. I don't believe that everybody realizes they're doing it. So I think like kind of bringing awareness about to it is really important. But yeah, I do feel like a lot of people have kind of socially weaponized it and made it a way to essentially score a win on any argument, because you can kind of just end any kind of dispute with that, and it's endlessly frustrating to be on the receiving end of it.
I mean, it's certainly a way to control things, and by discrediting people and their emotions and the way that they see the world around them. So, but like I, was kind of saying, I think the biggest way to kind of combat being gaslit. Is that a word? Gaslit. I think, the only way to really combat that is basically having a true sense of self and trusting your intuition. And because honestly, it's very, very easy to succumb to something like that. And the strongest people have, unfortunately.
I think the best way to kind of combat gaslighting is to kind of know that your opinions and your desires and what you're saying matters. And if it matters to you, you kind of have to stick to those guns and kind of not be deterred by gaslighting. So that would be my take on that. So on that note, what would you say is your personal philosophy regarding love and all of the wonderful and terrible things that come along with it?
I mean, I'm quite a romantic, so I'm a huge believer that everyone has a soulmate out there. Call me crazy, but I truly do think that everyone has someone special for them. And I'm a huge believer that everything happens for a reason. And I'm a huge believer that timing is everything. And I really do think that a lot of the relationships that we have, have had in the past or in now that maybe we quite feel like weren't meant to be, or, obviously they've already ended. I think a lot of the relationships that we have, it's easy to dismiss it and say, oh, that was such a waste of time. But the reality is everyone that comes into our life, they're coming in for a reason and they're teaching us something, and then we're growing as people at the end of the day. And essentially we are growing into the person that we were supposed to be in order to meet our soulmate. And I am a huge believer in that, because if you think, people who meet their soulmates, and when I say soulmate, I'm talking about their twin flame, like they have the chemistry and you could just tell that they are together and they love each other unconditionally and they support each other endlessly, and the energy is just contagious. When you see true love, you know it. And I think that when you see those relationships, if either one of them would have met each other years before they actually met, it might not have worked out, because they weren't the person that they were supposed to be at that very moment. So I'm a huge believer that everything happens for a reason. The things that come into our lives all happen for a reason. And I think that timing is key. And I think that we all do have a soulmate out there. We just have to be patient, and we have to be open to learning, and we always have to strive to be the best version of ourselves possible.
Gotta say, we are kindred, not so hopeless romantics, because I would probably put my top two most important things in terms of finding love to be chemistry and timing. Those are both so paramount, and either one of those can easily tank a relationship if it's not quite right. Is there anything else that you would like to say to anyone listening?
So I think the biggest thing that I would love to just really leave off with, and it's something that I'm going through right now, so it's something that I'm very passionate about. Right now I'm on the journey for self-discovery and just really working to be the best version of myself and truly loving myself and really learning my self-worth and, that self-acceptance. And I think that, all of these things are paramount in order for me to be the best version of myself. And so every day, I am learning more and more about myself, and I'm being open and trying to understand and to make habits for acts of self-love on a daily basis, and just really making sure that I'm not relying on someone else to love me. I'm not relying on someone else to give me my validation and fulfillment or to fill a void. I really want to make sure that I'm doing that for myself. So really, I just want to really create myself to be the best version of myself possible. So I think that one of the best ways to do that is if you see someone who you just aspire to be, write down a list of all of the qualities that you enjoy about this person. And then at the end, apply those to yourself and just be the best version of yourself possible.
You know what, Danielle? Suddenly I feel like going out and buying myself some flowers. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly been a pleasure.
That interview was so much fun to do. If I ever do a blooper reel, I definitely have some cuts for that. Of like any topic that I have learned about in college or, discovered upon different moments of my life, there is none that is as illogical as love. And love in and of itself makes no sense whatsoever. I think that the purpose is to kind of search for that answer, even if you will never find it. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at Overheard Orlando Podcast or shoot me an email at overheardorlandopodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening. Stay true and tell someone you love them.